little bit overview of it's a little bit of background on my experience. I spent the first 20 plus years of my career serving as a HR business partner. I had worked in both the private sector, the public sector, and had a lot of great opportunities to really partner with leaders to successfully implement organizational changes, big and small, really able to partner with individuals at all levels of the organization to successfully implement their personal goals. And then the fun part of HR, which I say for anyone who's on the call and spent time in HR, sarcastically, is those fun employee relations issues. And what I really found with employee relations, I learned a lot. And what I learned is primarily interpersonal issues come down to communication. And a lot of our performance issues will really come down to communication. And those communication errors tend to have some level of a bias or a stereotype or assumption somewhere embedded that created some just miscommunication, misunderstanding. And so I'm real excited to spend the next 20 plus years of my career focused in on equity and inclusion. And for those of you who may be saying, hey, wait a minute, what about all the other letters? I want to take a moment to note we say equity and inclusion because that's where we really want to focus our attention. And we really realize that if we can get equity right, we're going to get inclusion and we're going to get diversity. So if I want to just put that out there in case that kind of trips you up or you wonder, that is the thought process and the mindset. I do work at UNC Health, and I am excited to have the opportunity to be part of the equity and inclusion department here. Our health system really delivers on increasing the quality of life for all North Carolinians and those we serve. And we have an exceptional department that focuses on ensuring that we have created a more just and equitable healthcare system that really focuses on patient needs. So I've been very fortunate to be a part of that. And I'm excited to jump in to talk about generations and those diversity pieces. A lot of what we will talk about today primarily comes from a book from Tim Elmore, and I put that at the end. It's a great resource, a great go-to guide for kind of a snapshot playbook, if you will, for understanding generations. I am definitely going to want you to participate, and I am struggling with the idea of not seeing the chat. So I might play around a little bit, but I don't want to mess things up so that I can see and you can jump in. And I'm going to ask questions. Otherwise, you will be very bored listening to me talk for an hour. And I certainly would love to see emojis, questions if you have them, since I am quite not having all the capabilities. Amber's going to be a great go-to person. So I want to try this chat function out first. And I got a question for you. In the chat, write who said it and who are they talking about to a couple of these quotes. Children, they just have bad manners. They have complete contempt for authority. They show disrespect. They tyrannize their teachers. They are just disrespectful to elders. They disobey parents. They ignore the law. Who said it? And who are they talking about? You'll have to help me out there, Amber, if we have anyone in the chat.
We don't have anything in the chat right now. Okay, here, there's coming in now. Someone who is over 50 plus.
Okay.
The older generation. Any older generation to any younger generation. Baby boomers.
Yeah. Well, let me reveal the answer. Socrates and Plato. Here's some more fun quotes. I see no hope for the future of our people. If they're dependent on this frivolous youth, they're reckless beyond words, they're disrespectful to their parents, they're rude, they're impatient. We really seem to have older generations talking negatively about new generations from the beginning of time. It's really nothing new, which is kind of interesting. It's become really a socially acceptable, if you will. If we were to replace young with a race or a gender or maybe a religion, it would quickly become not socially acceptable. But for us, we've just kind of taken the attitude that's just how it is, that we just tend to kind of stick with our generations, that we really more tolerate each other than anything. And so to help understand that process and that frustration that kind of can show up between the generations, I have this study from Neil Howie, who really looked at how do generations tend to operate with each other, particularly as new generations are starting to come into adulthood, as new generations are becoming, decision makers, hopefully contributing members to society. And what he found is they really tend to follow a similar pattern, a similar trajectory. And that when generations start to move from that childhood to that adulthood, they start to really want to break away from the previous generation. They want to really create their identity. So they may say to that first generation, you might be cool, but we're cooler. And then they really start to pay attention to that second generation removed, those parents. And they can say, you know what? We see you, mom and dad, and we love you, but we're not going to make the same mistakes you did. And then as they're moving into adulthood, they find that they've started to replace 3 generations. And so they really start to focus in on some of the pieces that we're starting to lose, that are starting to die out, and they bring it back. So that idea, that concept of kind of what goes out of style comes back in, we tend to see that through those generational changes. And what Neil Howie found is that this isn't intentional. It's much more of a natural, organic process. And of course, we all are hearing right now, we have 4 to 5 generations in the workforce. And this causes us to feel like there's a lot of tension and there's a lot of kind of tug and war. And we find that because we typically allow our generations to really live in their niched worlds, right? We allow that affinity bias to take charge, and we tend to like people who are like us, who are of that similar generation, who have those similar life experiences, those similar world views. But again, if we were part of a team and we were leading a team and we looked and we noticed that our groups were divided based on whether it's race or gender or some other piece, well, maybe a disability, we would have a red flag. We would say we have a concern we need to dive into. And so I want to encourage that we do that with our generations too, that we don't allow generations to simply tolerate each other, but more we learn how do we leverage the strengths that each generation brings to the team. And so as we start to look at each of the generations and some commonalities, some worldviews, I want to stress we're equity and inclusion professionals, right? So our goal here is not to stereotype, it's not to put a label onto someone, but it's really to help give us some guidance. It's similar to if we were moving or going into another country. We would do a little bit of research maybe to identify what are the cultures, what are the expectations, how do people of this culture tend to interpret? But we wouldn't necessarily stereotype and expect that every single person we meet is going to fall into that. So as we look at the next few slides, I definitely want to really stress it's more of a guide and not necessarily an opportunity to put people in boxes, because we don't put people in boxes. They don't like that. We don't like to be put in a box. But helps us kind of understand how do we move past these niches and really start to leverage. So the first thing I want to really do is identify what are the generations we're talking about. And so we have potentially 5 generations in our workforce. We definitely have 4, but we could have 5 in some areas. And so we want to identify those first. So the first one we want to look at is the builder generation. And this generation is born between 1929 and 1945. They were born and lived through a time of the Great Depression, of World War II. So that would identify that group. A lot of them are retired. Some of them might not be around and working, but some are, still saying, hey, I want to contribute. I want to be a part. So maybe they're in volunteer areas. Maybe they're in opportunities where they're doing some different light work in your area. Mm-hmm. The next generation is our baby boomers. And this, for the longest time, was our biggest generation at 76.4 million babies being born between 1946 and 1964. And this, just as it says, we've heard, that was a huge boom after the World War II. We moved then into a Gen X, and some people call that a baby buster, because we had less children during 1965 and 1982. And a little bit on kind of what was happening in the world at that time. We had the public access to birth control. We had Roe versus Wade, and our boomers were not necessarily running out to have 5, 6 children. So we had a decrease in babies. Our millennials, they are now our biggest generation at 80 million. They are also considered the biggest percentage of our workforce, and they estimate to make up 50% of our current workforce. And they were born between 1983 and 2000. Here, we really start to see in our world the focus on keeping our babies safe. In 1981, there was a kid named Adam Walsh, and he was kidnapped and later found murdered. And his parents started a national movement on ensuring we keep our kids safe. We started seeing things like our children's faces on milk cartons. Have you seen me? We get the baby on board stickers for our cars. Public restrooms started to have changing tables. We are really focused at this point on ensuring that our kids are safe. We're focused on their self-esteem and their status. This is the generation that entered into the participation trophy. And then this last generation that's just starting to turn into or come into the workforce is the Gen Z. So Gen Z 2001 to 2015, this is the first group that's really focused or just knows the 21st century. They are coming in and growing up in a world where they see a lot of terrorism. They have a lot of mass shootings. They've lived through 3 recessions. They lived through a pandemic and definitely some political polarization. So this group is just now starting to really take hold and make their mark in our workforce. I also want to note a couple of other things as we start to look at generational studies. Let's understand that this is more of a social science, so the dates can vary depending on the research you're looking at. But also, if you're born towards the end of one generation, 5 years from the end of one generation to 5 years after the start of another generation, you're considered a tweener, because you can take on characteristics of both generations. Also, these year gaps are large, so there can be subgroups within a generation. So appreciate it's not a perfect science, it's definitely a social science, but it gives us a framework to start working with. The next piece I want to really focus in on is Tim Elmore's concept of a life paradigm. And so this is what that generation's attitude was, or their motto was, when they entered the workforce. So for the builders, again, appreciate they're coming out of the Great Depression. They're very frugal, resourceful. They're grateful they have a job, right? This is, they get that job and they stay there for the rest of their life. My dad was a builder, and it was always, be grateful you have a job. If I was telling him I was leaving a job, you can't leave a job. You got to be grateful you have a job, right? Our boomers life paradigm, when they started working again, they weren't in a depression anymore. They were in an economy that was expanding, and they wanted more. They wanted a better life than their mom and dad had. They were coming in a time where things were changing. Shopping malls and McDonald's were popping up everywhere. And so they had conveniences, but they also worked hard. This group is very competitive because remember, there's a lot of them. And so they competed for those jobs, and they had very, very little work-life balance. With Gen X, as Gen X becomes, which is me, as we went into the workforce, our life paradigm was more of keep it real, right? Don't tell me life's wonderful. Keep it real. Let's just see what happens. Appreciate this is the generation where their parents worked, right? Both parents typically worked, and they worked long hours. Divorce rates were up. We had the entry of the latchkey kid. And so for those who might be on this call that don't know what a latchkey kid, someone please throw it in the chat. What we were on our own, and we were figuring it out. For millennials, the life paradigm they're given is life's a cafeteria. So they approach everything like it's a buffet, right? You walk up to a buffet, you get your tray, you decide, do I want soup? Do I want salad? Do I want a roast beef or chicken, chili maybe? We might want, are we still good? I got an
Everything's fine.
Okay, good. Sorry, I got a weird pop-up on mine. So I apologize. I apologize. But life is a cafeteria for this group. They approach everything like with options. That could be their religion. That could be their life. Think again about the time that this group was coming along, right? Who here remembers those Sunday newspapers, and they were huge, and they had all these inserts for coupons, and they had that insert that said, get 10 CDs for a penny. Right?
We have a couple. Allison,
Yeah.
not to cut you off, but we have the chat is kind of moving along, so I want to read some of the comments.
Okay.
Lisa shared kids who looked after themselves after school and came home to an empty house on their own. Joy shared, you got a key to the house and had to let yourself in, eat a snack, start your homework, watch a set amount of TV, and even start dinner for your parents and or take care of your siblings. Bonnie said, LOL. Jackie shared, and you were taught to not open the door for anyone. I kind of want to chime in on what Joy just shared. I'm a millennial, but I can relate to Joy. Like I couldn't like do your homework, eat a snack.
Yeah.
Don't touch
And
the TV. You can't, come in the house when the street lights are on. So it's just weird.
yeah.
I'm not gonna say it's weird, but it's interesting because I'm a millennial, but I have a lot of Gen X in me.
I'm a Gen X and I have some millennial in me. So I get it. So again, just a guide. But one of the things with millennial, think about the world they grew up in. You didn't have to buy a CD for that one song you actually liked. You could pick and choose. You could get this from this artist, and you could curate your own music in minutes, right? So they had options. They've always had options to kind of make it their way. And with Gen Z, it's coping and hoping is the life paradigm they were given. So they're coping again, appreciate they have gone through a lot in that short amount of time, and but they're young and we're still hoping for a positive future. They still have expectations of this great life, but they are one generation that definitely is hit hard with mental health issues. And what's great about that generation, in my opinion, is they're willing to talk about it. So appreciate that they're the most connected generation that we have, but they definitely feel lonely. They have an increased feeling of isolation despite that level of connection. I appreciate you checking the chat and definitely interrupt me. So the next piece I want to focus in on is how each generation views authority. So that's authority, whether it's your manager, whether that's the police, your political incumbents. Our builders always respect. It was always respect the position. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to like them. You didn't have to vote for them, but you respect the position. The boomers, as they were entering, they're like, you know what? We can do better. I want better. We can do better. We're going to replace them. And again, think about this time frame in our history. We are really starting to see a lot of the social justice movements. Gen X is like, you know what? We just have to endure them, right? We can't. It is what it is. We'll just deal with it and check out and go to Starbucks maybe. Our millennials choose them, right? So they have life's that buffet. So they may have a manager, but they might not see that person as their mentor. And they may have more than one mentor. They may say, you know what, I need a mentor for this part of my life, a different mentor for this part of their life. And they might use their mentor to understand how to cooperate and work with their manager. So they choose their authority. And then Gen Zs, they're really not sure they need them. And you think about the conversations that parents have with their children today is a lot different than what builders had with their boomers. I always like to say, I don't know how anyone parented before Google. My kids would ask me questions. I'd be like, I don't know the answer. Let's just Google it and find out. And I also appreciate, as I was looking and reviewing this, how we view the role of our authorities, right? So for the longest time, as a Gen X, if I had to learn something or I had a question, I went to someone else because they were the person who held the knowledge. So if I went to you and said, I don't know how to do this, can you show me how? That was my form of respect because I believe that you have the knowledge to show me how to do it right. Fast forward a couple of decades, and now I think if I don't try to find it out how to do it myself first, then I'm disrespecting someone. And that really came from kind of learning and understanding from millennials and Gen Zs, right? You can go to YouTube and Google and learn anything, it feels like. If I don't know how to work some gadget at home, I learned how to fix my washer dryer by a YouTube video, right? So they are really not sure they need authority. What can authority tell them? What can someone tell them that they can't figure out on their own? And we're going to get there because there certainly is value that they can't necessarily just get off the YouTube and Google searches.
We have some comments in the chat that I wanted to read. Kia shared, you had to wait for a song to come on the radio if you didn't have records or cassette tapes. I am Gen X. And Tashelle shared, millennials spend time trying to take care of their mental health. And we have a lot of issues because of societal issues like college debt, not being able to buy houses, even though many of us have college degrees. That's true.
Yeah, right. And if we're and I love that you put that in there because when we talk about that piece, that's all the stuff we don't know. Right. And so as we're operating and connecting with different generations, we don't know that Gen Z, to your point, is probably the most debt ridden generation at the ripe old age of 24 that we've had. And so we don't know those stresses, those concerns. And so that was a great call out. Great call out. Yes, I remember the top 10 at 10 and looking to make sure I could get that. I could hit the record button fast so I can make my own mixtape. I appreciate that. Thank you again, Amber.
You're welcome.
So I want to talk about the pandemic also because these national and world events really shape us. And so for the builders, as they were going through the pandemic, they've seen tough times before. So their theme, their motto is, you know what, we've survived tough times. Boomers really were focused in on how's this affecting their retirement. I remember listening to multiple conversations between my mom and her siblings on, hey, what did your retirement do? What does it look like for you? So they were really focused on how long term that's going to affect them. Gen X's, I told you life was hard, right? It is what it is. Also, I want to appreciate with Gen X and that idea of viewing authority and enduring them is appreciate this is the first time in history they lived through Vietnam and Watergate. And this was the first time that our public officials admitted that they lied to the people. So they really have this very kind of keep it real, don't sugarcoat stuff. Will figure it out. Our millennials, they're wondering, again, we see all of these workplaces changing on a dime, and they're really trying to understand, how does this affect me? How is this going to affect my plans, those dreams? How do I reconfigure after this pandemic? And our Gen Zs feel like, you know what, they kind of got postponed a bit and penalized. This is a lot of them were going through right when they were their senior years in high school. They were starting out in college. They weren't able to have those experiences. They're now figuring out, how do I get a job in a time where things are different? Things, the landscape looks different. So they kind of, again, a little bit feeling like they might be behind the eight ball. And I definitely want to get your feedback on what was the first thing that you can say, the first national event. I remember exactly where I was when this happened. And how might that have shaped you? So for me, my first crystal clear memory of a national event was the Challenger explosion. And I was in elementary school. It was a big deal. We were excited. I went to the library. Every class was somewhere, the gym, the cafeteria, the library. I was crisscross applesauce waiting for this big moment in time where a teacher was going to be launched in space. And then suddenly it exploded. And I remember all of the excitement, and then a very quick moment moving to really kind of a stunned, a sadness, a not knowing what to do. I, at this age, can now appreciate, my heart goes out to those teachers who were like, what just happened? And how am I going to explain this to the children? But in the chat, what was the first event that you crystal clear remember, where you were and how that might have affected you?
So Bonnie shared space shuttle explosion. Tashelle shared Cumberland 911. I'm going to share 911 as well. I was in elementary school at school and didn't understand why I had to go home early. Monique shared Gen Z pandemic added to feelings of loss, loneliness, and mental health issues. Lexi shared as a millennial, that's 911 for me. Laura shared 911. Kia shared 911 terrorist attack on New York. Joy shared, yes, the Challenger exploding was frightful to watch as a child. Sheely shared 911. Monique shared Challenger explosion. Cedar shared Challenger Gen X. Sherry shared 9/11. Joy shared also as a college student the X-rated 5 being arrested in New York. Tashelle shared shooting at Cumberland. Yeah.
Wow, yeah. So it's really neat to think, as we're coming in to these work groups, that we all have these different, like, very memorable experiences that shape us, and those look a little bit different. And it's a great, again, opportunity where we can start to maybe learn from each other.
We have
The next,
another chat, a
okay.
comment as well. I have a memory from my country as a child, and once I arrived and started living in the USA as an adult, was the Clinton trial.
Yeah, I remember the Clinton trial. I definitely remember that. I was in diversity training during 9/11, so that's always my, like, how, what an interesting coincidence. So my next piece I want to really focus in on, we're going to take the role of work and a person's sense of identity together. And so for our builders, having a job was really important, right? Again, Great Recession. So having that job, keeping that job was very important. And their sense of identity is to be humble, right? To appreciate that they're part of a community. This group, church was very big at that time. There's a lot of memories around, meeting, the community meeting at a church and really bringing in their vegetables, their harvest, and dividing that out and making sure that they took care of each other. Our boomers, work was a central focus, right? There was not a lot of balance. There was a lot of competition. They spent a lot of time there. And their sense of identity is they're valuable, right? Appreciate a lot of innovation came out of this generation. So they knew what to do to help make the society better, to make the economy better. And they were big enough that people wanted their dollars, right? So a lot of companies were looking to understand what is it that boomers are doing? What do they want? How do we get some of that buying power? Generation X, their role of work is more of it's just something we have to do. So we kind of put up with it, but we want more balance. They really are wanting to bring balance. And their self-identity is they're very self-sufficient. Remember, they're at home, they're responsible for taking care of themselves, and they can take care of themselves now. Millennials, they look at work as a place to serve. Appreciating, again, we're starting to see less things in our community, and so work becomes that community place, that opportunity to serve and give back. And so they look for that in their companies. And we see that when companies they might not want to get in the fray of political issues, but their employees are starting to demand it. They say, we need to have a voice. We need to use our power to kind of jump into the conversation. So they are looking for that in an organization. And their self-identities are awesome. And that's okay, because we wanted to make sure that they felt that way. We wanted to make sure they stayed safe and that their self-esteem was protected and they had a good status. So they are like, you know what? I'm here and I'm great. And our Gen Z works more like a hobby for this group. Think about how jobs have changed. We have a gig economy now, right? So if they want to work for a little bit, there's opportunities for them. They also have that kind of hacker mindset. So they want to get in and figure something out. That's fun for them. We have more entrepreneurs coming out of that generation. They also have a very fluid identity. And this is particularly interesting with LGBTQ. A lot of Gen Zs are saying, you know what? Don't put a label on me. I'm fluid. I'm figuring it out. I don't want to be categorized or stereotyped any certain way. And
We
the
also
last
have something in the chat from Tashelle. She shared, that's why I went into social work, but I'm trying to have that Gen Z attitude.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. I'm with you. Me too. So let's talk about how we really start to value each other. And so we want to look at what each generation can really bring to the team. And so builders have wisdom, right? They've been there, done that. They know how to survive when times are tough, as well as when times are doing great. They're very resourceful, right? This is the generation that reused the wrapping paper, right? Save the wrapping paper, we'll use it next year. They're also very, very loyal. Our boomers bring experience. So while we might be able to Google and figure things out on the internet, that internet can definitely give us great facts. Our boomers really know how to use those facts. So they also bring efficiency and effectiveness, right? They created a lot of innovation, and so they can use that as they continue through. Gen X, we're pragmatists. We are very resourceful, we're very self-reliant, we're problem solvers. If something happens, we can pivot. We can figure that out pretty easily. Sometimes people see like, oh, they're just naysayers, but we need naysayers. We need that person to help understand where are those gaps, what are the blind spots that we need to ensure that we're taking account to. So Gen X, they can help you pivot quick. Millennials are ideal. They have ideals, they have energy, they really bring their love for a mission to their organization, and they help to remind people that it's not just about work, it's about mission, it's about creating impact. And then our Gen Zs, they're all about innovation. They're very savvy. They know how to, again, get into something new and figure it out and then make it better. But we need all of these pieces. And one of my favorite examples is in 2007, Mark Zuckerberg, 39, created Facebook, was like, kids are just smarter, meaning his generation was just smarter. They're faster, they understand technology. But later he hired Sheryl Sandberg, who was a lot older than him, because he realized that she brought a lot of wisdom, a lot of value. And together, they really worked to create a pretty remarkable product. So I want you to take a moment as you're looking and thinking about the different generations in your work group, and what strengths have you noticed that the other generations bring to your team?
We have something in the chat.
Okay.
I think that geriatric millennials are more like Gen Z in their value to the team. They are more pragmatic. I'm a Gen Z and I see that trait on many of them.
Okay. Nice.
Gen X.
Okay, I started to, and remember, and I love the geriatric. There was a comedian that uses that term, and I love it. But if you're in that 5-year kind of buffer period, you can take on traits from either generation. So I love it. So maybe you're wondering, what can we do? So maybe if we're not seeing the value, how can we start to see the value? How can we start to leverage? And the first is we have to really understand. We need to seek to, again, identify, what is it? If I'm having a strong reaction to someone, if I'm having strong feelings, being able to take some time to understand where's that coming from? What is that fear? But then also, if you're not understanding what someone's saying to you, if you're like, hey, I don't get that, being willing to engage, which definitely takes a level of vulnerability. Being able to say, hey, I don't quite understand what you're saying, or I don't really get what you're saying, or I'm struggling to connect, or I don't understand why you don't value me. It takes a level of vulnerability to engage in that conversation. But really, we get the benefit when we're truly intentional about it. So we're intentional in our observation, and we're intentional in our ability to engage and be vulnerable and understand that my way is a way. It's not necessarily the only way. It might not even be the best way. And so I'm going to be open. I'm going to be open. And we can start that by having really quality conversations. If we're seeing that we have these generational lines and we have this kind of breakdown in communication, how do we start a conversation that's really rooted in that respect and curiosity? How do we ensure that if I'm going to ask that question, I'm doing it in that respectful way because I'm actually interested. I'm actually wanting to understand. And we all know when someone's coming at us, or we kind of get that feel when someone's coming at us, and in a very sincere way versus a very like, I'm just doing it because I have to. I'm tolerating you versus I'm trying to understand you is two definitely different starts of a conversation. We certainly want to be mindful of the assumptions and biases we bring. So if I'm saying those millennials, those Gen Zs, or those boomers, right? We can have a tendency to take on that polarization, that negativity, but being able to step out of that and being mindful, being respectful, but then also appreciating that even despite those generational lines, we all have some strengths and weaknesses of our personality. So that shows up in our conversation. So being mindful, and it also might be something that kind of you have in common with another generation, right? I laugh. My daughter's communication style is just like my dad's communication style. They are 3 generations apart, but they have a lot of very similarities. And so how do we connect? How do we connect, whether it's our style, our approach, whether it's our interest, whether it's our, we both have dogs, or we both like this kind of music, or this kind of extracurricular activity. Taking time to really identify helps to move that person past that stereotype, that that millennial, that boomer, to an actual person.
Allison, I apologize for jumping in, but we have a few comments in the chat that I wanted to share.
Okay.
I love working with Gen Z and millennials, and not so much as Gen X or boomers, because they are so focused on keeping the status quo. I'm a Gen X that has gone through a lot of deconstructing and decolonizing work. Yvonne shared, what about Generation Jones? They're really not boomers since they were too young to be a part of the major milestones of that era. Tashelle shared, I second that, Fernanda. Joy shared, something happened. I lost the chat. Hold on. Sorry.
I can hear you. I lost you there for a minute.
Yes. Joy shared, I asked those of different generations to help me as we move through working together, being transparent about who I am as a Gen Xer, and let them know I am learning. So let's give it grace if we miss something and celebrate our good work together.
There you go. I love it. I love it. I appreciate it. I am feeling like that Gen Xer who is technology challenged. So I appreciate everyone's help and patience. So we did want to pull people in, and I heard that a little bit, I think, from some of those comments. We've all probably had that experience where there's 3 of us, 2 people are really engaged in a conversation on something that you know nothing about, right? So whether it's I'm talking about grandkids or children or my retirement, whatever that looks like, if we realize that there's another person with us that doesn't have anything to add or isn't in that area, be intentional and pull them in, have that conversation and let them feel valued, right? We all kind of can wonder, like this comic, do they even know I'm here? I also want to hit a good one on just be really specific with your appreciation.
Did I go out or? Okay. Allison, I think you went out a little bit.
Yeah, I think she has connectivity issues.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Okay. Well, I can't, I'm trying to figure out let me see if I can share. Um, so we want to be really specific. Everyone's desire is to be seen, right? So we want to know that if we're being appreciated, that saying I enjoy working with you is a lot than I enjoy working with you because you're
I think I think when she shares her screen, her Zoom gets a little fuzzy. Mine does it as well. Let me pause real quick.
what you didn't know is we're on patience. So we're all here about how do you pivot and how do you move? So really, again, be specific with your appreciation. People want to be seen. They want to know that when you say thank you, what is it that you're thanking me for? The other big piece is we want to be really clear on expectations. And so I think I heard someone mention earlier about policies. So understanding that we are applying policies uniformly, but also that we understand what are those expectations. We want to make sure that as we have training opportunities that we're applying those, everyone gets that opportunity. And we definitely want to get people's voices in the conversation. But one of the things I hear most is we want to be clear on how the decision is going to be made. So getting everyone's voice is definitely something that millennials and Gen Zs want, but they also need to understand that not everyone's voice is given the same weight, right? Sometimes based on the position, the responsibilities, some weight may be given differently based on that position. So being really clear on how that decision is going to be made, because that can frustrate generations when they're like, well, you asked my opinion, but you didn't take it. Also appreciating and setting the clear expectation that our leader decisions will be honored, right? They're going to be honored, they're going to be respected. And if there's an opportunity to kind of have a conversation or understanding, what do you want that to look like? Do you want that as an open door? Them to come in and say, I don't understand why this decision was made, or do you want it in an email? But having that really clear expectation on how we engage with each other, how we make decisions, and how we solve problems is going to certainly help with that generation friction. The last big piece that I want to hit and is being open to the idea of reverse mentoring. So this is an idea that's been around for 30 plus years, and it's really ensuring that we're really mining the gems and the values of that new generation as they're coming in and understanding what they bring. So we do that when we go back to that very beginning, when we're intentional about it and we're vulnerable to the idea that we might not have all the answers, or we might not have the best way, or what I heard in the chat, we're relying on a policy that's 30 plus years old. One of my favorite examples is the tattoo policy. And when I started work, you didn't have tattoos. If there was a social kind of thought on people who had tattoos were less valued or less knowledgeable. And we fast forward 30 years and we found that there's been a change in society. And for companies that are slow to kind of evaluate these kinds of policies can really find themselves behind the 8 ball. And so for me, I was working for a company who needed to examine it because they had a no tattoo policy and they couldn't find employees. They couldn't. So it became an issue with recruitment. And so they didn't willy-nilly change their policy. They did some research. They researched what is common practice. And they also talk to their customers, and they wanted to understand from their customer base. And what they found was that customers didn't care about tattoos. Customers, matter of fact, in some scenarios, trusted a person with a tattoo more than they trusted a person without a tattoo. So this idea of reverse mentoring can really help ensure that as organizations, we don't have just a binary option of do we keep it, do we not keep it, but we really look for what are those friction points and how do we create that third option? How do we create the synergy that comes from working together? And part of it is also choosing to be just a real lifelong learner, being open to that. And so I'm finishing up. I appreciate everyone's flexibility. I do have the slides that I think Amber, do you have the ability to send that out?
Yes, I'm going
Perfect.
to, I was actually getting the email ready now. So I will send the PowerPoint out in a follow-up email, and your contact information will be in the email as well for anyone that wanted to connect with you after this.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And for me, the piece I really want to leave you with on like, what do I do next, is really taking that opportunity to continue to increase your self-awareness, really taking the opportunity, if you're leading a team, you know, is your team divided on those generational lines? And if they are, what are some ways you can start to break it down? Whether that is icebreakers during meetings, whether that is, you know, putting something in for connection during those retreats, but starting to get really intentional on breaking down those generational lines. I also included Tim Elmore's book in there. It's a great resource, and I appreciate everyone's patience and everyone's flexibility.
Thank you, Allison. Great presentation. We really appreciate you. If anyone has any questions, want to comment, just feel free to raise your hand. And if you would like to be promoted over to the panelists, I will do that at this time.